Marc Berkman is the CEO of the Organization for Social Media Safety, a national consumer protection group that has educated thousands of students, parents, and educators on social media safety and spearheaded legislation like Jordan's Law, the first to deter social media motivated violence. Previously, he spent over a decade advising members of Congress and the California State Assembly, crafting laws to protect children and families. Marc holds a JD from Columbia Law School and a BA from UC Berkeley. Hi, Marc. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I want to start with asking you about the roots of the Organization for Social Media Safety, which was born sadly out of tragedy when the founder's son was subjected to an extreme physical crime while being filmed and posted. Can you talk about the connection between online interactions and real world violence in adolescence?
Absolutely. So, just to give that backstory as well, my co-founder Ed Peisner, and currently our national education director, his then 14-year-old son Jordan was at a fast food restaurant, local fast food restaurant, with some friends after school. Very normal thing. When another teen that he didn't know walked up behind him, hit him as hard as he could. Uh, that was filmed by the attacker's friends and shared on social media, where it went viral. And I happened to be a chief of staff for the state assembly member in the area at the time. And this video landed in my inbox within about an hour of its happening. And so we were had a clear understanding that this wasn't an isolated incident. And I started working with Jordan's father, Ed Peisner, and we researched what we now call social media motivated violence, or these attacks committed for the purpose of filming them and sharing them on social media for the purpose, as we found, to get those likes, those shares, and those views, or as kids today would call it, clout. And so we found that starting around 2006, the birth of social media as we know it today with Facebook back then, starting in 2006, we could find about 4 cases of what was then called the knockout game. So teens, was almost exclusively teens perpetrating, would walk up behind someone on the street, hit them as hard as they could while someone was filming it and sharing it to what was then called Facebook Live. Uh, from there in 2006, we really could chart out very clearly a exponential doubling each year of these types of assaults. Fast forward to then in 2016, we could find thousands and thousands of these examples of social media motivated violence. And there were even then and now websites just dedicated to hosting this type of violence. So incredibly concerning. Now, as was mentioned in the introduction, we do educational work with students across the country. And we have a partnership with UCLA School of Education to conduct research. We have found in our work across the country, it's about 80% of fifth graders have seen this type of real life violence through social media. And so we have a few problems here. We have a really extensive problem with exposure to this type of violence. So exposure in and of itself by the research can cause short and long-term emotional harms,
Mhm.
including PTSD as well, for really severe explicit violence. And then we have a normalization problem. The more people watching this type of violence, the more normal it becomes to the viewers. And most of these viewers are teens and even tweens as well. And so that increases the likelihood of perpetration that we see on campuses and out in society as well, for committing not just social media motivated violence, but violence in general. So this is a really extensive problem. ongoing to today that requires a number of different interventions still, and we're very concerned about it.
Wow. I mean, I knew a little bit about this before, but I had no idea the numbers were so staggering. And I mean, I speak to hundreds of parents in the parent eds, and I think most people are aware of cyberbullying, for example, right? Like maybe the mental health aspects or being hurt in that way. But I don't think people are aware of this issue at all on a widespread basis. I think what's really interesting is you talked about this idea of like normalizing it, which is horrible, but these are kids with developing brains. So it does make sense to me. You know, you're seeing this, you're seeing the amount of engagement come in, which is also horrific that that is the motivation for these crimes. Um, but that part of it is super concerning to me, the normalizing aspect. And like you said, kids as young as tweens seeing this type of content and thinking this is normal and this is just sort of the way it is. The other thing that came up to me, and I don't know if you have any feedback on this because we talked about social media, but I'm sure you saw the Hindenburg report on Roblox, and
Mhm.
there's also normalizing going on uh, in the context of video games as well. And I'm sure you guys have dived into this, but the thing that popped up that came out in the report was there was a game inside of Roblox where you could beat up homeless people or pregnant women, right? And this is a game that is played by kids as young as I think 6 is you know the youngest of their probably younger of their user base. So I mean it's such a huge issue. Those are just the things that I would add to what you said. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, but the normalizing it and the normalizing it for young ages younger than you think is just terrifying to me.
Yeah, that normalization and desensitize, I can never say the
Yeah.
word, desensitize, well, I'm butchering, but you
Yeah.
know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Being desensitized to this type of violence has has effects both on the individual child and society at large. So we
Yeah.
see, which has played out over the last 15 years, increased perpetration of this type of violence. But also, uh, we would theorize, it's yet to be proven in the data, but we would theorize it's part of the reason we're seeing some of the mental health outcomes that we are seeing with increased social media use, from anxiety, depression, self harm, and others. And so
Yeah.
it's really a concerning dynamic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, can I pivot a little bit to social media companies and public trust? So, social media companies have introduced tools, I think more so lately, to improve public trust. So, some examples are the recent Instagram Teams accounts. I'd love your input on those specifically. There's also Snapchat's Family Center. And but according to the recent leaked documents from the TikTok lawsuit, for example, their time limit app, which is another one of these public trust initiatives, accounted for just a 1% reduction in time spent by teens. So, what do you think of some of these tools specifically or at large? And do you think social media companies are doing enough to keep their youngest users safe?
Let's start with the answer to that question at the end, which is no, not
Yeah.
even close. It's incredibly concerning.
Yeah.
Um, they're very good at putting out talking points to the public, especially right before congressional hearings and consideration of legislation in Congress. They're very good about putting out talking points in terms of the things that they're doing. Instagram released the announcement about their new settings right before the Kids Online Safety Act was to
Yeah.
be considered. This isn't coincidence, and they very well know what they're doing in terms of um, delaying accountability and confusing the public in terms of the uh, safety levels of the product that they're putting out. Um, if you look at Snapchat's parental controls, I know you mentioned kind of the lack of use of TikToks, and Snapchat as well. And this was discussed in the Senate congressional hearing
Hmm.
with the CEOs of some of the major platforms as well in terms of the utilization rate of these features that they put out. But part of the reason that parents aren't using these features is because they're just not effective. If
Yeah.
you look at Snapchats, it doesn't really do anything to increase safety. As a parent, what you're able to see is who your child is following on Snapchat and has conversed with in the last 7 days. It's almost of no utility to a parent with a child on Snapchat. The teens these days are following hundreds and hundreds or connecting with hundreds and hundreds of people on Snapchat
Hmm.
in their high schools, even junior high, and unfortunately see elementary students on Snapchat as well. But that list of followers is not protective for a long list of harms that we see injure children through Snapchat, specifically like cyberbullying, sexual predation, and some other harms. It's almost impossible to suss out who your child should not be speaking to out of a list of hundreds of people with usernames that don't necessarily accord to their actual names too.
Yeah.
So it's not it's not a useful intervention we've found. What is a useful intervention is what we call third-party safety software. So that's
Hmm.
software like Bark that we recommend. Bright Canary is another one. And what that software can do typically is it can send parents often life-saving
Yeah.
alerts when dangerous content comes across your child's social media account. So all the harms I just mentioned, from cyberbullying, sexual predation, drug trafficking, uh, violence, uh, third-party safety software has stopped 17 school shootings.
Mm.
So this is an available product millions of families use. The problem is that for the product to work efficiently, the social media platform has to grant access
Yeah.
at the parent's request between the
Hmm.
child's social media account and the chosen third-party safety software provider. Some platforms allow this access. Snapchat and TikTok specifically do not.
Yep.
Um, Children have died because of that decision, and there is no good safety reason for preventing that access. This is one of the reasons that we've developed Sammy's Law, which is being considered in Congress, and we're
Hmm.
hopeful will move next year. People can find more information for that at sammyslaw.org and sign our petition. But that is a critical thing that Snapchat and other platforms can do tomorrow that would provide meaningful protection for millions of children, yet they refuse to do it.
Yeah. I'll add to that too, because we actually partner with Bark as our safe tech partner.
Oh, excellent.
And they have told us also iPhone doesn't cooperate with them. So it just makes it convoluted. And I've had parents personally complain to me about just issues with, and I don't know specifically what they are, but on iPhone specifically, it works very well, but without that full cooperation, like you said, you're not going to be getting that full picture and the full protection. So I just wanted to add to that it's not just the social media companies. Apple seems to fly under the radar, but they are also not doing nearly enough to protect kids. So I just wanted to
It's
throw that
true.
in there.
Apple has a closed architecture, unlike the Android. So that
Yeah,
is part of the reason too. A Bark phone is a great solution
yeah,
for parents out there of teens that are on social media. The Bark phone is, in my experience, very, and our testers' experience, very seamless
yeah,
to set up. That's run through the Android system.
yeah,
So
and
yeah,
you
but
can pay. Yeah,
these are major issues here, and I think we're going to have to force the platforms through law. The safety features that they are offering are just wildly insufficient, and the proof of that is in the harmed children.
yeah,
Our best metric, and the platforms will throw metrics out at the press and the public. The only metric that matters when we're talking about these safety features is how many children have been harmed on the platform? And
Mhm.
has that gone down with the introduction of features? It's the only metric that matters, and we continue to see the harm happening.
Yeah, totally. And I'm going to throw one more thing in there because I am in the tech industry and this is the lens that I look at this through. And I will tell you, and I know you know this, but iPhone is unequivocally an adult product. It is not designed for kids, never has been. Apple is a hardware company, not really a software company. And their parent controls, yes, they have them, but they are a retrofit to an adult product where something like a Bark phone was designed with kids in mind, right? So that's a really, really important distinction that I don't think parents understand. They think, okay, I can get the iPhone and put on the parent controls. But to your point, they're convoluted. Also, they don't really work. There's been endless, I think there was a New York Times story just recently that I've yet to read about coming down on Apple and their harms to kids. But there was that X-rated leak that went on for 3 years. And not to mention, they do okay protecting kids on Safari, but you can pop up a Google browser inside of any other app, right? And Apple's not doing a good job there, and they're convoluted to set up. So I just wanted to add to that. I know you all know all that, but just from an inherent design point of view, and you don't see Apple advertising directly to kids for iPhone. Like this is an adult product. Like even they know that. So I just wanted to throw all that in there to add to that.
Yet, yet they all have them, and
Yep,
it
they all
brings
have
up
them.
an important point that we
Mhm.
teach to families, which is what we call the lose-lose trade-off.
Yeah,
And so less so with the hardware, but it still plays a role. Everyone, the kids want the generally across the country, they want the iPhone because everyone
sure.
else has the
Yeah,
iPhone. Um, but lose-lose trade-off specifically if everyone is on Snapchat in the fifth or fourth grade,
yeah,
or sorry, if one or two, three kids is on Snapchat in the fifth or fourth grade, pretty soon you see that whole class on because this is how they're maintaining their social
yeah,
relationships. And there is this horrible equation for parents of maximizing safety on the one hand with putting your child at a social detriment on the other hand. And
yeah,
we see the same dynamic play out with the choice of phones because this is what they're showing everyone as well, and it's a problem. There's certainly are safer phone choices than the iPhone out there. And
yeah,
if you're going to use the iPhone as a parent, you kind of have to lock down the whole thing. And as you
yeah.
said, there are
And
still
then
end
what's the point of
runs.
having an iPhone? Like my son's friends, some of them say, "Oh, I got the iPhone, but all they can do is talk and text." And it's like, well, then why get the iPhone? Why buy $1,000 whatever it costs now thing where you could get something like a Bark phone and then you can pace it. You can start
Mhm.
with talk and text and then add on internet, add on certain apps, things like that. So I think, I think parents just don't know. I think I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that these products exist. But yeah, certainly I think we're both in agreement that these are products that aren't designed for kids, basically.
It, it's
Um,
it's very true, and I'll say that Apple is not updated. It's so they run their safety settings through what's called Screen Time, the
yes,
program, and it really has not been updated in about 5 to 6 years. Some
yeah,
very minor
yeah,
updates in there, and there's so much more that they could do to make the product safer. That's in within their capabilities,
yeah, for
and so
sure,
we'd like to see them do that.
for sure. Okay, I want to circle back a little bit. I mentioned the Hindenburg Research Report already, but I just want to ask you a little bit more about that. So that recent report by Hindenburg Research called Roblox a pedophile hellscape, quote unquote, and it detailed the sexual nature of some of their experiences. It includes things like digital strip clubs, games like Escape to Epstein Island and Diddy Party, just for a couple examples. And then others had a complete lack of empathy. So I mentioned this already, but there was games where you can beat up homeless people, pregnant people. So why are games like this available to kids? And what effect do they have on empathy? We covered it a little bit, but if you had to zero in on that specifically.
Uh, Excellent question. First of all, it's really important for your viewers to understand that Roblox is social media. Uh,
Yes.
these games exist on the platform because of these social media enabled features. So
Mhm.
user generated content is that other people can interact with fits within our definition of
Yep.
social media. So you have, and people that haven't used Roblox that are watching, as a user of Roblox, you can go and create a game through the tools that they offer people and then put it up for other users of the Roblox platform to consume, to play with. And so that means that your child has access to this user generated content.
Hmm.
That's not even including access to chatting with
Yep.
other individuals as well, which is social media, a social media feature too. And so what we found since the birth of social media is that when people can put up in the public user generated content, some of those people have really bad motives or
Yep.
intent. And so we see dangerous games being put up. And again, setting the issues we see on chat aside for now, because your question was on the gaming. Um, Roblox too has tried to exempt themselves from uh, the legislation I talked about earlier, Sammy's Law,
Yep.
and required third-party safety software for a platform that markets to children specifically. It blows my mind because we have seen some real, as you mentioned, concerning games and then other harms as well. So this is also something that Roblox could do tomorrow to protect their child users and still has not done so, which just makes no sense when you look at it from a safety perspective. It makes sense when you look at this stuff from a business perspective.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that. In terms of empathy, obviously we get back into that concept of being desensitized
Yep.
and the normalization from watching it. There is a little bit of mixed research, I should point out, because we're strictly evidence-based. Mixed research on video games impact when we're not talking about real life footage, what that impact is in terms of likelihood that a child perpetrates violence and mental well-being. That evidence really is still evolving. It
Sure.
does not mean because that's evolving that we don't take a safety first approach here, um, and restrict that type of content for our children. But the evidence is evolving, so need to be clear on that. Now there are other, as I mentioned, other harms happening through Roblox, including sexual predation,
Hmm.
sextortion, cyberbullying, exposure to hate speech. A lot of that happens through the chats. There's also bits in the games as well that parents need to be aware of. This is not um, because it's gaming. It's not some safe world to open up to your child without thinking about it and without taking steps to maximize safety.
Yeah. I'm
Did I
so
answer
glad.
everything in your
Yeah,
question there?
totally. And I think we did cover some of it already earlier, but I'm so glad you led with Roblox is social media because I think parents tend to put the stuff in different buckets, right? This is gaming, this is social media. I'll never give my kid TikTok, but they're letting their 6-year-old play Roblox, right? So we also educate parents on this very topic. And what the way we frame it is these connected games, most of them, Roblox, Fortnite, etc. They have social media hidden inside, right? So they may call themselves video games, but they absolutely are social media for the reasons that you talked about. But it's also a lot of the stuff we talk about, which is like the dopamine elevation, the social comparison, like all the stuff that happens on social media happens on these games. And they're not the same as the games that we grew up with, where they were leveled, they had they weren't wide open, they weren't endless, right? They weren't connected to the internet, right? Like that is not the same as where you can go on and not only have access to anything which you covered, but also be able to compare yourself to your friends. We haven't even gotten to in-app purchases, right? But that's how Roblox makes their money. Nothing's free. So, they string the kids along, put them on the hamster wheel long enough to where they have like an okay experience, but they really need to buy the Robux to get the full experience. So we try to explain this all to parents, and it's somewhat complicated, but it's it's the premise that you brought up, but then also some of these features that make it absolutely social media. The other thing I'll bring up is age. We do talk about the common sense rating for Roblox, which is 13. And I think they rate it that way because they view it as social media as well. So I think that's something parents don't know about either, right? Because there's very, very young elementary kids that play this game. And then the last thing I'll throw in, because we talked about kind of the PR aspect earlier, it was very soon after, I want to say it was 2 days after this Hindenburg report, which got a lot of attention, where they upped their parent controls. Did you see that?
So
I haven't dug into how meaningful they are. I'm going to guess probably not, right? It's a lot of the stuff we talked about with Snapchat, where it's not particularly useful. So let's just say it's not a game that I recommend, for young kids for a
I
lot
will
of
say
different
this
reasons.
though, there is a way to make it much safer
Yeah,
for younger kids. You can go in um, and disable the ability for a child to use the user generated game. So
yeah,
basically remove the social media aspect. You can shut off chat where they're only using the curated games that come directly from Roblox.
yeah,
And then if you have your child playing with their friends on those curated games through FaceTime, if they have FaceTime on a separate device so they can talk to their friends while they're playing,
yeah,
that makes it significantly safer. It really is a different experience than
yeah,
coming
for
in. So
sure.
there are things that parents can do where they're still potentially giving some access, but they are maximizing safety there.
Yeah, for sure. I just wonder how many parents know about it, how many parents take the time to do it, because it's just so much work.
It's so much work,
Yeah,
but it gets back into this lose lose that the parents face. Where if you have, and we see this with Roblox, you have, third grade, a third grade class where they're going and they're spending an hour a day, which is less than our average actually on Roblox, and that's how they're communicating with each other, spending their time. And you have the 1 to 2 kids that are kept off. That is
yeah,
also potentially a harm to the 1 to 2 kids. So parents face this really impossible choice. So the question becomes, how do we help parents thread the needle and maximize safety in a way where, and there's a few answers to that question, um, in a way that we're not creating this trade-off and causing harm on either side of the equation, which is a problem.
yeah, for sure. Okay, can we pivot a little bit to a really tricky subject, a difficult one, which is child sex crimes? So, 82% of child sex crimes originate from social media sites. In many of these cases, predators are luring kids from safe websites and grooming them on another app. So, can you explain how this works and how parents can protect their connected kids from being exploited in this way?
Yeah, I mean, there is a significant connection now between human trafficking and social media and different forms of human trafficking. Obviously, the worst scenario that pops in our mind is someone the child doesn't know that comes and abducts them and forces them into prostitution. To be clear, there are a number of different forms of trafficking, and that is one of them. Taking that worst form, what we see often is that when we look at the cases, that these types of predators will generally use a catfishing method. So
Hmm.
that means they'll imitate being a 13, 14, 15-year-old, and then go out and try to connect, follow, friend, whatever the social media platform calls it specifically, try to connect with another teen. And they're doing this hundreds, thousands of times over just to build up their connections. On the side, they're running some of the sophisticated ones are running software to detect when a child says something that indicates that they're vulnerable. So they're depressed, they broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, bad grades, hate their parents, any of those statements that a child is sharing in the public,
Hmm.
um, then the predator swoops in. They typically start up a conversation over social media for a period of a few months. Then they'll ask eventually to meet up at a physical location.
Hmm.
The child will go and meet up thinking that they're meeting up with a fellow teen, and then lo and behold, they're meeting up with several adult traffickers. So really concerning that type of scenario when you come across these cases. I should add too, that type of trafficking, other types of trafficking, children are also sharing a vast amount of personal information. The school that they go to,
Yeah.
the hobbies they're interested in, their likes, dislikes, all of which predators can use to their advantage. That includes predators known to the child as well, that then can use that information to groom
Yeah.
a child for sexual predation purposes. So, but that's how the worst case scenario can play out. Now,
Hmm.
it is, to be clear, a low risk harm in the sense that it's not like a child goes onto social media and they are preyed upon in that way. This
Right.
is happening a few thousand times a year in each state. So it is happening. It's happening with regularity. And another important point, it has freed those types of human traffickers from working in specific geographic regions. So they can target children across the country.
Okay.
Now, even though it's a low frequency harm, it is one of our worst nightmares as parents. It's also one that is fairly simple to protect against with some interventions in the home.
Hmm.
So, first of all, parents need to have a conversation with their child if they're in this world of social media about the nature of this harm because they're at risk for it. And we may not want to introduce the concept to our children,
Yeah.
but they're at risk for the harm. And you can't protect yourself from a harm if you don't understand what it is and how it works to harm you. So, that social media safety conversation is really essential um, as your child is entering this world. And remember, you may not be allowing social media at home, but your child is likely getting access to social media at friends' houses, at extracurricular activities. So keep that in mind too. So the conversation, you've got to set the rule as a parent that your child cannot follow people that they do not know in real life on social media. That includes, as we just talked about, on gaming platforms, because we'll see 12-year-olds all the time say, oh, my friend on Roblox. Turns out that friend is a 40-year-old they don't know that's spending 4 to 5 hours a day with your child. So only people that they know in real life, preferably their own age too. Obviously, kids can communicate with some family members, but we want to generally keep that to people their own age on social media. And then uh, finally, those settings, right? Calibrating the settings
Hmm.
on the child's app and devices. We've talked about that a little bit and some of what the platforms are offering and sufficiency there. But certainly, every time that you are downloading an app for your child to social media app and allowing them on it, you want to go and make sure that you're maximizing the privacy settings for your child so that only their friends, and again, friends who they know in real life, can see their content. That's a really important one. Turning off geotagging,
Hmm.
geolocating on social media apps. So Snapchat, for example, has a feature called Snap Maps,
Yeah.
where other users can see your location. For some reason, Snapchat advertises this as a safety feature. It is definitely not. So you want to go and turn that off for children if they're allowed on that platform, and then others have some similar features too. So I think I covered
Yeah, you did.
the
I
gamut
think you got it
there.
all. Just a quick clarification. You mentioned the statistics of maybe like a few thousand cases. Are you talking about trafficking?
I'm
Uh,
talking about human trafficking. It's a
okay.
really hard crime to
Yeah.
get a bird's eye view on the statistics for. It's likely there are many more cases
Yeah.
than we actually know of, but that's kind of what the best information that we have to work off of that
Right.
gets released.
What about sextortion, though? Wouldn't that be more widespread? It's probably widely underreported, but do you have those figures by chance?
Those figures are available through the FBI. There
Yeah.
has been, I don't want to give the percentage number, but there's been, because I don't want to get it wrong. And I just talked about this in congressional testimony. But there's been an explosion over the last 3 years based on
Yeah.
those FBI numbers of cases of sextortion. So this is I'm glad you asked about it. It's
Yeah.
a really relevant harm. For those that don't know what the term means,
Yeah.
sextortion is essentially blackmailing someone to get sexually related content or blackmailing them into performing sexually related acts through the internet and social media. Typically, and we see this a lot on gaming platforms too,
Yeah.
a child will be catfished again. That teen will ask for sexually explicit photos or videos. The child will share them with the predator, and then they'll get blackmailed, extorted under the threat of publicly sharing that content.
Yeah.
And so we are seeing a rise in suicides related to extortion. And so children need to know, first of all, that there is an out if this happens to them,
Yeah.
that they can get help, that they're not alone. It's not the end of the road for them, that there is help available, and that this has happened to other people, that they are victims of someone doing a really evil act. But it is a really exploding harm here that parents need to be aware of.
I don't have the information in front of me either, but I don't know if you know Clay, cyber safety cop. Him and I talked about this specifically. I want to say it's in the hundreds of thousands of reported, which would make sense if you're saying it's a few thousand for trafficking. And I think the year over year increase was in the hundreds. I think it was like 160% year over year rise in these crimes. And, maybe some of it is more people reporting it, but it's definitely a sharp increase as you described. So I'll find those numbers and put them in the caption for this part so people have them. But
Yeah, I want to say
that,
it's maybe 350 or something like that is what's popping in my head, but I want to
in
be
the past
careful that
few
I'm
years,
I'm
yeah,
guessing, yeah, over the last 2 to 3 years, if you
yes,
look at the graph,
yeah,
it goes
it's way
it
up,
goes
yeah,
straight up, and it's a huge concern. And we talk to parents that have suffered the worst tragedy because of sextortion, and uh, like human trafficking, the interventions here to prevent this from happening are really simple but effective. It's having that conversation, setting
hmm,
those rules. Third-party safety software is also a really effective deterrent for this
yeah,
type of harm, which is why it's so unconscionable that some of the platforms are preventing that access.
yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you about another hard subject. You're getting all the hard questions here, which is we're going to pivot to AI a little bit. So, AI on smartphones specifically is creating opportunities for kids to make huge mistakes online through many different ways, but specifically through deepfake technology and explicit AI. And with cases of deep fake porn specifically generated by students as young as middle school, those are popping up all over the country. I don't know if we have data on it, but just anecdotally, even in my area, there's been three, four, five cases just in the past year or two that I can think of just off the top of my head. So, what can parents and schools do to prevent this very serious and devastating situation from happening to their child?
Yeah, so glad you brought this up, and kind of zooming in. There's a range of harms from the AI piece that we could spend a
Yeah,
whole episode, I'm sure, on. Zooming in on
yeah,
the deep fakes, uh, this was a threat of concern to us starting back in 2017, 2018. It is a harm that is born and bred on social media. Somebody
yeah,
released some code over a social media platform for how to create deepfakes, and it is spread from there. There's a number of different harms that deepfakes can help perpetrate. One of those is what we call malicious pornographic deepfakes, or
yeah,
non-consensual intimate videos. Uh, and I should take a step back too. For those that don't know, deepfake is the ability to take someone's likeness, put it into a video that that person has nothing to do with, and it looks hyper realistic. I
Yeah.
know more and more people are becoming familiar with what this is at this point. Um, but I go back to when we were first talking about it in 2018, and no one had any clue that this was available.
Yeah.
And so we developed some legislation starting in California to criminalize the use of someone's likeness in pornographic videos that that person did not consent to. At the time, we were told that this wasn't going to be a big issue. It wasn't going to filter into high schools and middle schools.
Mm-hmm.
And predictably to us, we've seen that happen over
Yeah.
the last 5 to 6 years. So what can people do now? So first of all, awareness. We did just pass this legislation finally in California to criminalize this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Other states have passed it as well, a number of other states, and they're working on it congressionally. So knowing that law is both protective for your family in case it happens, but also spreading that knowledge is a deterrent to people creating these types of videos and spreading
Mm-hmm.
them, especially our middle schoolers and high
Yeah.
schoolers who aren't fully understanding the harm there yet. Some of them. So understanding the law, having these conversations with our families too, that if they come across this, we want the content reported and blocked, that it is harmful for the people featured and harmful to spread and to leave up on platforms. Um, Children need to have an understanding of what to do if they're featured in one of these videos, that
Mm-hmm.
again, they're the victim. So uh, feeling comfortable going to a trusted adult and getting help and trying to get that content stopped and taken down. Um, uh, Back to our rules too, that creating and spreading this type of content, and just spreading is the harm too, right? Even if you don't
Yeah.
create it, can be illegal in some of these cases. And then one of the big interventions here is on the tech side as well. I know you mentioned Apple a little bit. Professor Hani Farid, who's on our advisory council, one of the leading um, voices in the tech field on deep fakes and creating technology to identify what is and what is not a deep fake. I mentioned that in connection with Apple too, because he has technology that Apple was going to use back in 2021 to identify child sexual abuse material that
Mm-hmm.
Apple decided not to use,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And that was actually just in the news this past week, their failure to. I think they're potentially getting sued for that. I think. Uh, but that technology on deep fakes, the protective technology, is a big piece of the safety puzzle as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just to clarify, in many of these cases, these deep fakes are being made of other students by kids as young as middle school, but teachers as well. And just to go back to the harm, which I think you covered, like, even if it's not you as a kid, as a middle school, high school child, it is still devastating to have that circulated. So even if you did nothing, this can be something that you can be harmed from. Like in the case of sextortion, right? Like maybe you actually took the photo or made the video or whatever. But in this case, kids are being targeted that did absolutely nothing. And to me, that adds a whole nother level of devastation to it. I mean, I don't want to compare these harms because they're all awful, but I just wanted to point that out. Like as an adult, if it happened, I mean, it's uncomfortable, it's embarrassing, but as a child, I think it's devastating.
It can be really harmful for psychological well-being,
Yeah.
really harmful. And as you said, your your child at home might not even have a device or be on social media, and the thought that they can be targeted um,
Yeah.
this way is
Exactly.
really disconcerting.
Yeah.
I would
But
keep in mind, though, something that I didn't mention before, and this has nothing to do with culpability, but to be able to create deepfake videos, does require some level of source material, source
Yes,
videos, source photos. So that is a reason to be aware about what content you are putting out to the public too now.
totally. Yeah, I was going to add to that. I don't know if you know Sarah Adams, but she does lots of work in the sharenting categories. So just not sharing public pictures of your kids at all. Obviously, keeping them off social media as long as you can, things like that. Because again, a lot of these cases are happening from people pulling public source material from online, just readily available. So yeah, I just wanted
There's
to.
a yeah, and there's a huge difference between if you have, 60 to 70 friends on Instagram as an adult
Right.
that are following you on a private account and you share pictures versus having an open public account and
Yes.
sharing
Yes.
pictures. What we try to do on our side is really trace concerns back to actual cases and research. And this is one of the instances when we talk about deep fakes where we have been able to track kind of what we would call oversharing with ending up being turning into actual harm for a
Yeah.
child.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time. I've kept you longer than I wanted. You know this, but I so admire your org and everything you're doing to specifically in on safety. And I learned a lot today. I'll be honest with you, things that I didn't even know. So thank you, thank you, thank you for your time. And we will be in touch, I know.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate all of your work, your org's work as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark.